Okay, awesome. Welcome, folks. I feel like I'm being interrogated here a little bit. These lights are really bright, but I think we got a good crowd. So we're super excited to talk to you tonight. I'm Peter Hallinan. I'm a senior manager at AWS AI. My technical background, as you can guess, is in AI. Had a PhD out of the Harvard Robotics Lab. Since then, I've built a number of products and also built organizations building new products, which is why I'm one of the folks talking to you here tonight. Currently at AWS AI, I run a team that is involved in responsible AI. And boy, we have lots to talk about. So I guess I should mention to begin with that at AWS, every one of our service teams is responsible for its own fairness. And we have a large community of thousands of builders involved with fairness and responsible AI. And our team supports this community by developing new algorithms, new tools, best practices, all of which accelerate their efforts. And one of the key efforts, or one of the key levers we have, is our work in IDE. And so that's in particular why I'm here tonight. So this evening, what we're expecting is that our panel will explore tangible actions that all of us can take to build more inclusive products. We'll draw upon lessons in our work on IDE, lessons from our work on responsible AI, and our experience with over 100,000 customers who have been using our products in ML. Okay, so let's jump in. If each of you could introduce yourselves and share your pronouns, and then tell us a little bit about why this topic is important to you.
So I guess I'll start off. I'm Dia Nguyen, and my pronouns are she and her. And I've been with AWS for a little over 4.5 years. When I first started with the company, I was focused on helping our customers think about how they transform their organizations around people, process, and technology. Really, what do they do to leverage the cloud and the technology in the best ways to get the most value? And in about a little over a year ago, I guess in 2020, made a transition into the Emerging Technologies and Intelligent Platforms team, where I bring some of that same context to how we look at building and enabling our customers to build products with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and how do they look at that, doing that responsibly. So I lead a team that's focused on engaging with our customers to think about what things do they need to do to maximize their benefit, but minimize the risk and unintended impact. And that's not just focused on the technology, but that's also looking and considering the people, process, and technology parts of it as well. And why is this topic important to me, and why is it important for us to have this discussion? Well, I would probably say first and foremost, if you look at me, I'm a person of color and a woman. And so it is naturally, I would say, an area of interest and passion for us to be building systems and for our customers to build systems and products that actually benefit us all and minimize unintended impact, which oftentimes are for underrepresented and underserved communities like mine. So it's a great responsibility that we have to having this discussion, but it's one of great passion and interest, because I know that when we bring collective minds and experiences together, we can start to tackle this problem.
Thanks. Nashley?
Sure, so I'll go next. I am Nashley Cephas, and I am also on a team that works on AWS AI, fairness and mitigating biases in AI technologies. I have been employed at Amazon over 5 years, and I have worked on other teams, such as launching products. If you ever used the camera search app on the retail side, I worked with that team as well. I actually came into Amazon as a result of being the CTO of a startup company called PartPick that was acquired by Amazon back in 2016, and so I've been there ever since. Originally from Jackson, Mississippi, so I'm a southern girl, and I currently reside in Atlanta, Georgia, where I went to grad school at Georgia Tech. Got my PhD in electrical and computer engineering. I did my undergrad at Mississippi State University. Very passionate about bringing technology to people who often don't have access to it, because a lot of times that's where a lot of the biases and issues can come up when people lack exposure and access and don't have a say-so in the technology that they often consume or technology that revolves around them. And so very passionate about those sort of things. I have a nonprofit called Beam Path. We do free tech help and expose people to technology back in my hometown of Mississippi. And also we're building this huge tech hub in that area as well to serve that same purpose. So definitely a big advocate of all the things that we're discussing today.
And Pietro.
Sure. My name is Pietro Perona. I'm a professor of computer vision at Caltech, which is in Pasadena. And I'm also an Amazon Fellow, which means I'm one of those people who gets to have lots of fun coming to Amazon and thinking about the next generation of products and how to think through the science of what we're doing to make our systems work really well. I've been working in computer vision for 35 years now, which is a long time, and I've seen the progress from desperation to hope to finally getting things working to some extent. And more and more, and now it's like being a child in a chocolate store. It's really amazing what our field can do. One thing you may enjoy to see from our work is you can download to your phone, to your smartphone, iNaturalist, which is an app that recognizes up to 50,000 plants and animals from photographs. And we work on that in collaboration with the California Academy of Science. And so you have a naturalist in your pocket, and it works really well. It's really amazing how much you can achieve. And I can boast because it's my students doing it, and so I can be a little bit gloating here. One big surprise for me coming to Amazon was discovering that I can be very close, much closer than I thought to society. There is this issue of bias and fairness in AI that is very important, and I wasn't aware of it before I joined Amazon. And so I'm trying to help, especially on the computer vision side, put this question on a solid footing. I see a lot of promise in solving some of the issues that society has had for a long time, and technology can help us get closer to where we want to be. And so that is something that is very exciting for me.
Okay, so let's just jump in here. Why is it so important to bring focus to this area of building and operating products responsibly and inclusively? In other words, why are we doing this panel? Anyone?
So I think we've kind of talked a little bit about it, right, in that we want to actually be able to leverage AI and machine learning in ways that allow us to solve some of the most complex problems, and we're seeing evidence of that already. But we have to realize that in absence of having the right perspectives, in the room, there is the potential for bias. Nashlie mentioned it, right? Some of the reason why she is focused on, bringing technology to the underrepresented is because that voice, that perspective is not heard. And we were just, talking a little bit earlier about this. The experience that I have is very different than Pietro's and Peter's, and in some cases even Nashlie, me being a city girl versus her maybe growing up in the South, right? But we won't consider some of the things that have an impact on how we leverage the systems or some of the outcomes and how individuals will use our products, absent of having those individuals in the room. right? And having their perspective be seen or understood. And so it's important for all of us, especially organizations who are, building products and delivering services, that we actually represent all communities that we ultimately want to serve or we want to use our products. And that's part of, this conversation. We have great opportunity as well as the potential for risk, and how do we mitigate those risks and leverage, and gain, from the opportunity that we have.
Yeah, so if I can pick up from here, so I look at things from the science point of view. First of all, it's great to work in teams that are much more diverse than what we're used to in the ivory tower universities. And what AI offers to us is systems where we can measure how things are going. And so unlike in society where you're never sure what's going on and how people feel about things, and if you build a system that does something practical like scoring credit or detecting cancer or whatever, these systems are measurable, and we can see how they perform, and we can see if they do what we want to do, and I can absorb the lessons from thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people using them, and we can audit and fix them as we need them to be, and so we can bring them to work in the right way.
Yes. So yeah, plus one of all of that, I think it's very important. One, we're AWS. We pride ourselves in the services they deliver, our customer obsession, and really understanding the viewpoint of the people that we serve. And we want to make sure that everyone feels included, and that we're doing everything we can to really test that theory and push those limits. And so it's really important for us to be involved in whatever way, whether that's helping to educate people on the outside, educating our own people on the inside, and understanding, what are the dynamics, what are the areas we need to work harder at, what are the issues. And a lot of times that comes from interacting with the customer, interacting with the people who use the technology every day. And so, one of the things I really enjoy about my work as a tech evangelist is I get to interact with a lot of people and do that type of outreach. And yes, we regard it very highly.
You mentioned something, Ashley, and you said about our customer obsession. And our customer obsession, as well as one of our leadership principles, insists on the highest standards, really require that we actually are building and enabling our customers to build systems that are going to put the customer at the center. And so if we're talking about, putting the customer at the center and being customer obsessed, then their end customer has to be considered. And that's people from, all sexual orientations or gender identities or all abilities and all racial or ethnic background and other, right? That we start to put them at the center and ensure that systems and products actually work for them as well.
Okay, good. You guys are mentioning a lot of different parties involved in this. Who is actually responsible at the end of the day for fairness, for inclusivity? Is it the lawyers? Is it the builders? Is it the developers, the scientists?
Yeah,
How do we make this work?
I can pick it up. So for me, one of the pleasures that was mentioning before is coming into groups of people that look at things from different points of view. And so I come from computer science, AI background, and I tend to believe that if there is a technical problem, I'll tackle it and solve it. And here, it's not going to go that way. So I need to learn from the lawyers, what the definition of rights, the definition of fairness for the law. They need to learn from me something. For example, in some states, the law prohibits considering protected attributes in order to achieve fairness. But we know from the computer science side that you have got to consider them in order to achieve fairness. And so we can explain to them that the law is not written in the right way for this new era of AI. And then we need to hear from the business people who are have to sell the products, what is it that the customers need, and we need to understand with the customers what is it that they need to be successful. And then there is civil society. There are, the journalists, and there are the ACLU, and everybody comes in with a different angle, and everybody has something very valuable to say. And only working all together, you get to bake the cake right, so that everybody can eat it and it's nice and it can be baked in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just say that, yes, everyone plays a part, all of the stakeholders, not just the technologists. Yes, the technologists, we have a responsibility to understand the dynamics of society, especially when we're dealing with any type of technology that interacts with humans and human data. We have to understand what the dynamics are, both locally and globally, on whatever it is that we're building. With policymakers and regulators, people in government, we have to educate them so that they can properly understand how to enforce and regulate and put these policies together for this technology that most of them actually, they don't have a background in this, so it's very difficult for them to understand at times. And so I think also, again, getting back to that outreach that we do, being very intentional about it and making sure that we give people all the tools they need to do better. When you're talking in terms of people using technologies like law enforcement, for example, we found that when we educate them, when they know better, they do better, and they're very happy to do so. They just need someone extra to, come in majority of the time. And so I believe that everyone is responsible and everyone has some sort of accountability.
If you think about it this way, and I'm going to echo kind of what you heard, in that we all have a part to play. If a customer is building a product, the product team is responsible for thinking about who are the consumers, who are the customers of that product, right? And so they need to be thinking, do I have all of the customers identified so that those are included, right? And then we talk about the person that is developing, right? Are we ensuring that we're building, right, to actually satisfy the need of that particular consumer? Then we have our testers and our QA, who is responsible for ensuring that the original intent was actually executed when we developed. So if we're building a product that is going to meet the needs of this customer, that's done, right? And so every part of the cycle, every piece needs a certain kind of education and awareness, as Nashley was talking about, so they actually can fulfill their part in considering, are we making sure that if we're building, a widget that's going to, help us understand, something that I'm reading, that it actually meets the needs of those individuals that's supposed to use it or consume it. So we all, and that's every part of the life cycle, from those that are responsible for making a decision at the top level, that we want to consider this particular technology to solve a problem, and is this the right problem to solve, to those that are actually responsible for gathering the data, and is the data inclusive enough, or testing and executing. We all have a part to play. And then I'd say this as well, as citizens, we have a part to play. So we're talking about kind of the folks that are responsible for building a product. But as citizens, we need to also be thinking about, do I understand the ways in which our services and AI is being used, and holding the lawmakers and people that are responsible for regulation accountable to actually do that? Are we voting for individuals that are going to ensure that those guardrails and laws are put in place, right? We all have a part to play. So you may not be actually the one coding or training a model, but we still need to be considering that this is something that impacts us all at some level, and we all need to have a role to play in helping to resolve or ensure that they're inclusive. Okay. See if we can fix that.
We're all sitting here just frozen, afraid of the microphone.
Yeah, normally you would like
Wrestling it.
get to move around a little bit and
It's okay.
make sure that stays up there.
All right.
Building better products for people who have lapels that look like that.
That's right.
All right, let's zoom in a little bit and talk about some of the more specific challenges that we would face to being inclusive and unbiased when we're building products.
So it can be a very challenging, task. This area of research and science is evolving as we speak. And fortunately, it's gaining a lot of momentum, especially in the past, few years or so. It really, again, like she said, you have to really break down each component. When we're talking about AI, for example, or machine learning, these are algorithms oftentimes that it's difficult to tell the outcomes or explain the reasoning behind why you get what you get. But at the very core, if we can understand, how the things that we can control, how can we make sure that, data sets are balanced, data sets are annotated correctly. For example, are we getting a diverse set of people to annotate things to ensure the accuracy of those tags and those labels that go along with that data that we're training those algorithms with? Those are things that we can absolutely control. And so it's low-hanging fruit that we can take into effect. In terms of evaluating the algorithm, are there tools that can make it easier? It's pretty well known in the science community that there's so many different definitions, there's so many different standards. So how can we all come together to understand, what is it that you're referring to when you say this error rate versus this error rate for these different groups? And then often, we report on our results as scientists and as technologists, and we're reporting the usage of these technologies and how well they're being adapted. We can look at the intersections of different groups. So like, looking at protected groups, often marginalized groups across race, gender, age, ethnicity, background, et cetera, and understanding how do all of those things combine and really looking at the different outcomes in that respect too. So I say we would start with the things that we can control, but a lot of it, because of the nature of the type of technology, is difficult. But it doesn't mean we have an excuse. It just means we need to work harder and figure out what are the other ways to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that. So first of all, I have great admiration for people in industry who design products, because if you come from the science and technology point of view, you develop an algorithm or something, but it has to be, that's not a product. You have to figure out how people are going to use that piece of science, and you have got to capture the needs. So I was musing in thinking about what we would say today, was musing about my first experience for when I realized that product design is difficult and there are people who are excluded. And so my earliest memory is in kindergarten. So there was a cousin of mine whose name is Chiara, and she was known as being clumsy. So always Chiara is clumsy, and she grew up thinking that she's a clumsy person. And so the things where she could never cut along the lines with her scissors, when she would write, she would smudge the ink over the page. We used ink pens at the time. And so why? Well, because Chiara was a left-hander, and she was trying to use right-handed scissors. And when you write, left to right, and so you smudge the ink. And so her thought of herself was, I'm a clumsy person, and that colored her life, or colors her life to some extent now. And so now, on Amazon I checked, you can buy 379, I think, 497, I put a note here, different pairs of left-handed scissors. So now that problem is solved, so it's not a problem any longer. But this is to say that, we can get accustomed and blind to the needs of people who don't fit the mold. And so we live in a one-size-fits-all society from forever. And so I complain about, I'm tall, so I complain when I'm on a plane, I'm always uncomfortable. And I envy other people who are smaller and they can fit in the seats. And so I feel like, couldn't they design the seats a little bit better? And now I think that what what is different now is that through software and especially through AI, we're not in a one-size-fits-all situation, but we are in a custom fit for all situation, where we can imagine that our shirts would be fitting us well because there is a machine that measures our body and has them built. And the user interfaces fit us well and everything fits us well. And a dream is individualized medicine, where whatever drugs you're taking one day or treatment and so on is fitting for you based on your genetics. And it's AI and software that make this possible. So we are facing a situation where our industrial society is completely different, and we can really attend to individual needs and help everyone in the proper way. So that's something that makes me very excited.
No, I love the example that you just gave, right? Because the whole idea of, and you said something with her being left-handed versus right-handed. And, right, that is a majority, because there is a majority, or for the moment, let's say, because of the person that designed scissors originally was probably right-handed, and we believe that there are a good number of folks that were right-handed. All of the products at that particular time catered to individuals that were right-handed. And what you're describing is one of those, is exactly the challenge that we have when we think about AI and systems or products in general. But AI, more importantly, is that if there is a majority that is driving the decisions and the design and not considering, there might be someone that was different than us or perhaps didn't have, the same sort of proclivities, then they may be excluded, not seen, forgotten. And you brought in something really key in that scissors is a small thing, but think about what that message that sent and what she carried from that with her, right? And so we're talking about, in some cases, very serious, situations or experiences that could be much more devastating that happen over time for individuals that are excluded or not considered, that are disadvantaged. I told the example of people being blind and not having sight and not knowing what that experience is. So I may not consider that when I build something or I'm thinking about a solution, because I didn't live in that water, right? I don't have to traverse those areas. And so it takes bringing, well, I'm gonna say two things. It takes intentionality, one, right, to recognize that we have to now consider. And I'm saying now, human-centered design or some of those things are not new, right? but it takes some degree of intentionality to consider that because of some of the downstream impact that we could have.
But I think so. One point I was making also is that, by the way, I agree with what you're saying, that AI and software allow us to finally be there for people individually. Before, so if you were making plane seats, it's not that I imagine at the end of a long flight to Europe when my back hurts and so on. It's not that I'm thinking
you're not going to get the seats to fit you because that's a money
Sorry?
issue, but.
No, I'm not thinking, there must be a team of dwarfs designing seats and that's why they cannot conceive that I need a bigger seat or whatnot, right? Maybe I should earn more money and buy a business class seat. But no, it's just that, how do you deal with it? You cannot make a plane with 15 sizes of seats and so on. But, with AI, we can really estimate what people need and do it right. And so it's.
And I think Natalie was mentioning this too, right? So there are always some trade-offs, right? And what you're describing with the airplane, of course, is trade-offs. If we make more space, then we can only carry a limited number of people or fewer people. So do we allow more space versus not, right? So that's a trade-off that's being made. Similarly, when we think about kind of how we define fairness or, how we're going to look at each, product and its algorithm. We have to consider, like, how do we tweak and adjust factors for what's going to be appropriate for that population. And sometimes there is just some consideration to what does that mean from a cost perspective, and how do we balance what we want to provide for our consumer and what that means for what it might require for us to make it, or how much longer will it require for that to run, because there might be some other performance impact, right? So all of that has to be considered when we start to look at how do we build for and ensure that systems are more.
That's a good point. I was thinking about, oftentimes I see pretty tall people getting out of very small cars, and I'm 5'2", so I'm short, and so I like to drive pickup trucks and stuff like that. And I have a Jeep and all this stuff, and so but somehow everyone can reach the pedal, everyone can reach the steering wheel. So we figured out how to make these vehicles work for all sizes. I have a cousin, she's shorter than me, she drives an 18-wheeler truck, and and I was like, wow, so I'm very hopeful. I think all of us are, as while we're here, that we can figure it out. We just have to put in the time to work and be intentional, like she said.
Okay, so that's pretty optimistic. Are there some tangible things that an individual builder can do?
Yeah, so there are several things. I think, of course, being AWS, we try to encourage our customers to use various tools to test out their algorithms and to test their data balances. We have several, for example, SageMaker Clarify, SageMaker Data Monitor, Ground Truth, and so many more. But I think if everyone's using the same platform, if we have an understanding of what the common terminology is, what the standard is, then we can start to compare, then we can start to challenge each other a little bit more. What we've seen now, there's so many different platforms, there's so many different wavelengths, so to speak. You're really not sure if one news article is truthful or not, and in comparisons, apples to apples and oranges to oranges. So I think understanding and educating, again, it just goes back to that, working together, getting standards, people understanding where they fall short and seeking help in those areas. They're more specifically, testing for error rates. You can't assume unless you test. That's just how it is. And so continuing to consider the various groups, the various intersections of those groups, from race to ethnicity, background, sexual orientation, height, for example. It depends on whatever it is that you're working with. It can be very valuable. You may actually find something that has been forgotten for so long across the industry, and you may change the game for a whole perspective of people and customers out there that will be very grateful as those things tend to progress. I was reading an article just the other day. Not sure if this is fake news or not, but I think it was saying that Volvo had one of the first patents for the seat belt that had the cross shape instead of just the one that goes here. It actually goes there. It's like a 3-point, and they actually, I think they released the patent IP for free just because of the good of, man, this is going to save a lot of lives. It's not about money. It's not about who wins or who got to the finish line first. How can we help people? And I think that's the same feeling that we have.
Yeah. So actually, you began to raise some issues here about data in particular, I think sort of implicitly. Let's get into that a little bit more. What role does data play in encoding biases? What can we do to make the data sets fairer?
So I'm happy to pick it up here since that's one of my main jobs here. Okay, so first of all, everybody knows that data is really important. There was an article in The Economist last year that saying data is the new oil. And so I think that the people in the room, if they are working in AI, machine learning applications, know that by now, algorithms are fairly standard, and you find them in SageMaker and so on, but they don't do anything useful unless you have the data to train them and to get a model that can classify or infer whatever you need to do. And so everybody knows that you need data that are well annotated and a lot of it. And so I want to put a little bit more flesh on that to frame the issue. So there are three main functions for the data. So the one that everybody thinks about is to train my algorithm, and that's true. And it turns out that machine learning today is not as data efficient as humans. And so in the application I was telling you about before, iNaturalist, we know that in order to, for a human to learn a new species of bird, so take a birder who is used to California birds and they go to the East Coast and they show them the cardinal or whatever, it takes 2 or 3 examples and they're done. And for our algorithms, if we want to achieve really high performance, we need about 1,000 training examples per species. So the algorithm are really, really data hungry. And I have an empirical law that I developed with my students that says that if you take the error rate of your algorithms as a function of the number of training examples and you put them both on log scale, you see a straight line in performance, and you can drop your error rate by approximately 2.5 each time you multiply your training data by 10. And so there is a good news and bad news there. The good news is you can do even better than human many times just by having tons of data. And the bad news is in order to do better than human, you've got to annotate and collect an enormous amount of data. Anyway, so that's the training data. Then there are 2 more things that people often don't think about. So one is the use of data for defining the task. And so there is a point where you develop your application and you ask people to annotate the experts to annotate data for you to tell you what should the algorithm put out. And so you've got to have a diversity of data that you annotate, and it could be pathology samples, and so the pathologist has to annotate, and different pathologists have different dialects on how to annotate. And so you get into endless discussions of what is the type of annotation that the algorithm should reproduce. And so that's the moment of truth when you realize what is the algorithm really going to do. And so at that point, you can catch many situations where the system is not going to do well for some people. So think of something silly like detecting faces, and maybe you realize some people wear their hair down on their face, and you cannot put a bounding box around the face, and you've got to take that into account. Maybe it's better to detect the eyes, the nose, and the mouth instead of the perimeter. And so that's a very good moment to really understand what the product is going to do. And the third place, which is equally important for thinking about bias and fairness, is a test set which you use to evaluate the algorithm the model once it has been trained. And so you can train the models on a diversity of data, and the more data the better, as we were saying before. But when you benchmark it, you had better have a benchmark that mirrors the situation where you want to use the model eventually. And so if you use some Amazon system for detecting people or whatever, and you're going to use it in Tokyo or in Rio de Janeiro or in Cape Town, well, it's going to work differently in subtle ways. And if you're into the 1%, 0.01% error rates, you've got to benchmark your algorithm with data that are relevant for the application. And that's the place where you can detect biases, if there are. And so something I want to say is, well, people talk about unbiased algorithms, but there is nothing like that. You've got to, if it may be unbiased in Los Angeles, and because you spend time fine-tuning it there, but then you move it over to Moscow or to Beijing, and it's going to be biased in some way that you were not expecting. And so that's another really important moment. So data is crucial for achieving very low error rates. You have to have a lot for understanding well what is the algorithm going to do, and then to verify that the algorithm is doing it in a way that is unbiased and fair eventually. So that's the role of data.
Yeah, I think I often to put it in a different way, I always say my math teacher, when I was in middle school, she used to always say, just because you use a calculator doesn't guarantee you get the right answer. So you think about these machine learning algorithms are like huge calculators. That's literally all they are. And garbage in, garbage out. So good data in, good data out. Bad data, well, most of the time good data out, but bad data in, definitely bad data out. And so if you think about AI, getting back to AI, machine learning, even in terms of look at the COVID vaccinations, people often wonder, have they tested this? We are the test. Maybe, this is where the data is coming from. But you have to consider a data set that is representative of all the people that are going to be using that product. And so it all starts with the data that is just as important as the algorithm, the deployment, the follow-up, and then even after the product has been deployed, you want to continue to monitor it because things change, dynamics change in society. We saw that happen last year. We want to also understand what are the dynamics that are happening between humans and human interactions. So your technologists have to understand that people who use the technology, the people who the technology is used on, are also going to be in that loop, and making sure that, again, it all goes back to the data. Are you foreseeing things that may happen and trying to predict any issues and really thinking critically about how do you solve that?
So it's, I think you've heard some really good sort of technical steps that we think about with the data, and I think, or with the data, and we were just chatting before previously as well, just thinking about having a good understanding or awareness of where bias occurs, right? And so some of that is ensuring that people are well informed, people throughout the process have the right kind of education and awareness, right? Knowledge to know this is where things occur, or this is where in the process we might see bias, or where data occurs, and in some cases, historical context for how that might show up. And, we were talking about an example, not, just kind of chatting, but we've often heard people talk about, the gerrymandering example, right? And understanding kind of where lines were drawn and what that means. Well, that's something that was established previously, years ago, right? But then has an impact on data today. And if that is, kind of at its root in the data, then that presents bias that gets trickled down into our systems where decisions are being made. If we don't have the completeness of data, right? Ashley was talking about representative data for the population or the communities we're looking to serve. Then when we start to consider, things in healthcare or medicine, those individuals aren't necessarily considered. So does a specific treatment work as well for them as another community if they weren't, in our data set, right? All of those are examples of why understanding, context, having appropriate education, and then ensuring that we have and are doing what's necessary to have the robust sort of complete data that we need to really be able to rely on the decisions and the outcome.
Yeah. Okay, just to augment what you're saying, so I've seen many examples of us being blind as to some needs. So now I'm talking about not Amazon, about academia. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were starting to work on these questions, we might collect a data set of faces to train a face recognition algorithm or something like that. And clearly, at the time when we would scrape faces from the internet, which now is boo-boo, but at the time we would do it, some populations were available and some were not. Like many people did not have internet and many people did not appear, and so our systems were extremely biased. And so luckily that today is not the case any longer because we've learned those lessons. But we should always be very vigilant. And so there's a lesson for all of you in the room who do collect data to for training models. Always think carefully about where are you getting your data and whom might you be missing? Because and you will discover it. At some point, if you're missing out on a corner of, you collect your 10,000, 100,000, for example, 1 million. Well, eventually your system is going to be used by 1 billion people, and if you missed out on some community, it's going to show up, and you're going to have to scramble to fix it. So always think about where the data is coming from, and what might be sampling biases that you're not aware of, and you should think about. Famously for opinion polls, that's another. And so it used to be that opinion pollsters would make phone calls to find out how did you vote or what's your intention and so on. And they would miss out on people without a phone line. And so so the whole voting intentions were skewed towards population that had a phone line, which at some point was not common. And so that was an issue. So we're seeing the same things today, and we have to be careful.
So based on what you guys are saying, it sounds pretty challenging, if not impossible, to be totally unbiased, totally fair. Disagreement? Agreement?
So,
And
can we disagree and agree?
you can do both. You can do whatever you want. But what I want to know, either way, is what else can you do if you're building to at least maximize the fairness or the lack of bias?
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting, and I think Pietro started off by saying, that this is an interesting challenge, or that it's a hard challenge, and certainly when we're not thinking about it and intentional about it, this shows up in ways that we hadn't considered. I think the first thing is the reality, or recognizing that we all have bias, right? And when we say that, that means that we all have sort of mental shortcuts, things that we sort of almost unconsciously do and respond to because we've either been brought up that way or learned. And it actually helps us in many cases to be safe and to move quickly. But sometimes those biases can also have a negative or result in discrimination or harm, right? And so if we recognize that we as people have those, then and it requires intentional sort of action and thought to disrupt those so that isn't the way in which we lead and engage every day, then it requires that same sort of intentionality, because our systems are going to have those biases. Most of our systems are infused with the perspective and personality, if you will, of the individuals, right, that built them. So it requires same sort of intentional action, right, to disrupt it. And some of that intentional action are some of the things that we were talking about. What do we do to ensure that we have people with those perspectives in the room, right, to help influence how we look at the solution? And you mentioned this earlier, right, when you were talking about some of the examples. Perhaps there is a point at which we say, this is not a problem to solve with AI because we don't have the representative data, right? Like, if we don't have everything that we need,
well,
right,
I
that's
can give you
going
one
to
example, in fact. So in my early days, I worked on a startup that was doing fingerprint recognition. Mm-hmm. And we started off with a couple of Caltech students who then started a company, and it became a big company. And we started off realizing that there were problems, some people were not recognized, and so we started looking at it, and there were two classes of people that fingerprint recognition didn't work well for, and it was children, and it's because the ridges of their fingertips are not yet fully formed, and they're very fine-grained, and our sensors at the time could not reach that level of resolution, and elderly people, because their fingers tend to be very dry, and so they don't image well. They don't form a contact with a glass pane. And it was clearly, the product doesn't serve those communities. There is no question. There is a huge bias against children and against elderly people, and they deserve a good service, but we're not able to provide it. And so we had to say, look, it's this technology is not ripe for everybody. You have to be at least 10 or 12, and if you're old, well, try putting Vaseline or moisturizing your fingers because that's... And so sometimes you realize that your design or your product is not really equal opportunity for everyone. Right. And you have to be honest about it. You've got to develop workarounds and That's the way it goes.
So that goes back to, right, we were talking about the data, and you make me think about that as I was kind of mentioning, what things do we do and how do we start to mitigate the bias? Is it realistic that, we eliminate, all bias? And so I think in the point of one giving the context for, we have bias as human beings, we need to be intentional about disrupting that. We need to take intentional steps in how we develop, who we include, what performance measures we put in, how we test and iterate and review, right, in a continual cycle so that we can actually ensure that we're eliminating bias where possible.
So playing off that, does Amazon have a responsibility to build responsibly and inclusively?
Oh,
Brother.
absolutely. I think, it's kind of piggyback off what they were saying. We can gain these insights by having focus groups, by talking to people, by diversifying our tech teams. I know, for example, what we do, a lot of outreach and recruiting for the National Society of Black Engineers, the Society of Hispanic Engineers. We have programs that we help sponsor fellows for the Congressional Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, Asian Caucus, et cetera, in government and on the policy side, because that's just as important as, the actual technologies too. And I think too, we have several partners we've worked with, and I myself personally have had the opportunity to travel to DC, be on Capitol Hill, and talk to members of different organizations, NAACP, ACLU, et cetera, to work with these people and help understand what is it that we can do to do better, and make sure that everyone is on the same page. So yes, we have a big responsibility. Again, at AWS, so many AI services. Some regard Amazon as one of the largest AI companies in the world, and so we definitely have that responsibility.
Let me jump, since we're going to have about 7 minutes left. Can you describe some of the ways in which AWS customers can use our services to address these issues?
So a lot of it goes down to testing. You have products that are in the concept stage, but you also have products that are already been deployed, that are already in the hands of users. And so for those, we actually offer products where you can test at various stages. And understanding this is an iterative process. This is a total life cycle of an AI model or product that continuously you have to monitor and understand, how are we going to mitigate biases as they occur, even after you launch. And so I mentioned some of them before: the SageMaker Clarify, Ground Truth, SageMaker Data Monitor, Model Monitor, and so again, like at the concept stage, is your data well balanced? Is it well representative? Is it accurate? Are you getting people to help you with that accuracy? And then even after deployment, are you monitoring how well the error rates balance out across different groups? And then, as you say, sometimes there's trade-offs. You may actually want a product to be biased if it's going to be dedicated for a certain community in a certain neighborhood. You may design it that way. And so it really depends on how you define what fairness is and understanding what that means for you and your customers and your users.
Natalie's already mentioned a number of the services that, are on the technology side that are going to address model performance, our data, as well as sort of outcomes for detecting for bias, which is what SageMaker Clarify does, and then providing explainability, understanding of why it made a specific recommendation or inference, right? Those things are going to be critical. I think the other benefit that we have is in like my team and the work that we do, working with customers to actually not just talk about the technology and how we implement things on the technology side, but also how do we have this conversation that helps us to, look at, the areas of unintended impact. Are we considering, every people
Wait,
group?
and just to be clear, your team is professional services?
In professionals, yes.
Yes.
That's right, and professional services, so from a consulting perspective, being able to partner with customers and have that discussion. So in addition to the technology, bringing those two together, because what we're talking about as far as mitigating bias, it can't be done, or we can't solve the problem like responsible, inclusive tech with the technology alone, just the technology solutions. We need these other parts around people and process as well, and we get to, partner with them in helping them drive those decisions.
Okay, I think we have time for closing comments. Pietro, do you want to go first?
Yeah, gladly. So just summarizing a little bit.
A minute.
Sorry.
A minute.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting time. So many of the questions about product design and fairness and so on that we're talking about have existed basically forever. So if you take a historical perspective, we've started off from small clans, wandering around, hunters, gatherers. And so we are clannish in nature. And for us, it has been a long trip to go from being small clans to live in these very large integrated societies where we view each individual as a separate entity that has the same rights and the same value for everybody. And we have been struggling with many of these questions. And I see now that technology, and in our case, machine learning and AI, gives us a moment where we can think about society 2.0, in which we can redesign an entire set of things, and we can replace pieces of what we do that are maybe operated by humans in ways that we consider to be imperfect. We can give tools or replace or re-engineer and rethink, because we have technology to do things differently in ways that are much more fitting to our values and to where we want to be. And it's, of course, there are tons of challenges in designing these systems and in thinking how to serve people in the right way. But when you see a clean, a white canvas and you have a brush in your hands, you feel like really happy. And so that's how I feel at the moment.
So
Yeah.
I would say that we have a great opportunity, right? I'm bullish about artificial intelligence and technology as a whole, and I think that we have a great opportunity in front of us to be intentional about how we consider including others, not just to the table, but also building, systems that are going to serve all identities, and we also have, a great opportunity because as we were talking, and I know we've talked a little bit about the risk and bias and some of the challenges, but we are seeing AI benefit society as well, and really finding great ways in which we can leverage AI, and we want to be able to continue to do that. So the foundation for, being able to use AI in bigger, sort of broader, world impacting ways is for us to engender trust, and responsible AI really is the trust that, or is the foundation for the trust that people in society and our consumers need, in the products. So this is, again, a great opportunity for us to be intentional about how we approach that, so that we actually build systems and products, for all identities.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said here today, and I'm very proud of the work that we've done thus far. We've made a lot of change and progress, but we still have some ways to go. We're not by any means perfect in where we want to end up, and so I think I'm very happy to be a tech evangelist, getting actually to go in front of the people that we normally would non-traditionally approach about these topics, and make sure that they have awareness and that they understand what's going on, how we can learn from each other. So I'm really excited about that, especially having been an applied scientist and coming from that into this other role. And so again, it is very important. We have a huge responsibility, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
All right. Let me just mention for those of you who are interested in following up, here are 3 books, of course, available on Amazon. Allies and Advocates and Authentic Inclusion are 2 books which we recommend on the ID side. And then if you want to learn more about the issues specific to responsible AI, The Ethical Algorithm by 2 of our scholars, Michael Kearns and Aaron Roth, is also really interesting. Other than that, thank you very much. Really appreciate your attending.
So the